Before I dive into this episode of Un-jargoned Brain Facts, as I call it, let me do a little disclaimer. I am not a medical professional. I am not a scientist, and anything and everything in my podcast, especially in the solo episodes here, are for information purposes only. They are not meant to be diagnostic and not medical information. I just want to avoid getting in trouble here. I am in the field of learning and development, not in the medical field, not in the field of sciences or pharma or anything to do with that. So I just wanted to make that clear at the very beginning. Right, now that the disclaimer's out the way, we can start with our un-jargoned brain facts. So the brain is consisting mostly of water. And the percentage, they say, is 75%, which is quite a large amount. And it might not come as a surprise that if we do not drink enough, if we don't hydrate enough, then it might have an impact on our brain and on the cognitive functions. So I had a look round at different recommendations about water intake, and there's quite a variety of different recommendations. There was one from an Alzheimer Drug Discovery Foundation that said women should drink 2.5 litres a day, while men should drink 3.7 litres. Then there was another recommendation from OSHA or OSHA.gov. No clue where they're from. I would assume they're from the States. They say it's like 1 cup of water per 20 pounds of weight. Then there are sources that work a bit more on an individual basis, which makes actually more sense since we all have a bit more of a different genetic makeup, a different metabolic function, all depending on how our bodies are made up and work. The important thing to remember is to just keep drinking about 2 to 3 litres of water a day. It can't be wrong. Drink when you are thirsty. And I would not include alcohol in this because there's other stuff in there that's not necessarily very good for us. Too much coffee or so is maybe not a great idea as well, even though they say coffee is not necessarily bad if you keep it in measures. Let's talk about neurons next. We have around 86 billion neurons in our brain, so they're the fundamental building blocks of our brain. And they're specialized cells, nerve cells, that transmit information to other nerve cells, not only within the brain, but also like muscle cells or gland cells in other areas of the body. There are three main parts to a neuron, and those are the dendrites, which is the part that receives the information. You've got the cell body, which contains the nucleus and some other organic bits. And then there is the axon, which is like a cable. It's like a little wire that transmits the information. I like to compare the axons to cables, also because of the myelin sheath, which is like a fatty substance that is like an insulation on a cable, so that surrounds an axon when a connection is really well established. What kills brain cells? Brain cells can get killed by neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's disease, dementia, I would think, is part of that as well. Trauma, head injury, then there is stroke, where you have a hemorrhage in the brain, like burst blood vessels, and that's disruption of the blood flow, and that can cause serious disability, injury, and death as well. Then you've got neurotoxins, and that's a vast topic in itself, to be honest, because you can have neurotoxins within the house, within the home, in different items, in personal care items. You can have them in food items, outside in pollution. So there is a vast area of neurotoxins. I hope to find a guest at some point to get deeper into that topic, which is really important. Another one that springs to mind is the mold in the house as well, especially black mold. There was a program on medical detectives that went really deep into that, into what neurological damage black mold can cause. Then there's neuroinflammation, chronic inflammation to the brain. Aging as well, but there is a myth involved as well. There's a myth that there will not be new brain cells when you get above a certain age. That is a myth. You can still get new brain cells developing even at advanced age. If you have any questions about stroke and the neurodegenerative diseases, any other things like that, you should maybe consult a medical professional. I'm not the right person to answer questions that are a bit more in depth. How do neurons communicate with each other and with other cells? They communicate through electrical and chemical signals. And the communication speed is rather mind-blowing because they communicate at a speed of, I had different numbers from different sources, so it's between 268 and 275 miles per hour, 120 meters per second. The speed of the transmission can be influenced by the physical and mental well-being, so it is important that you're always on track with your physical and mental wellness to keep those transmission speeds going, and considering how quickly thoughts come and go through and how quickly we process not just information but in emotions as well, how quickly all this happens within milliseconds. Emotions are registered within 200 milliseconds, long before we actually totally understand a situation. And if we think as well how we get 60 to 70,000 thoughts coming through a day, it gives us just a little glimpse into what an amazing organ our brain is, to be kind of the nerve center, the central processing unit of our body. That quick processing power has advantages as well as disadvantages. I suppose the advantages is that you can quickly find opportunities or any kind of dangers, but also the disadvantage is if you are not in control of your mind, then if you react inappropriately in a situation, it can cause a little bit of trouble, or maybe more trouble. Going back to the electrical signals, did you know the brain creates electricity of 20 to 25 watts, with which you could even power a small light bulb? So the brain is like an internal battery that keeps going and going and going, even when we rest. Even when we rest, it never stops. It only stops once we die. This makes it very important to keep the brain very well hydrated, to submit it with good nutrition and with movement and a healthy mindset. Next, let's demystify the fact that we don't use all of our brain. Well, it has been demystified by a lot of research that has been going on in recent years with all the different new devices that have come on, like the MRI scanners and research with that. So it's not that we just use 10% of our brain. Depending on what we do, different regions of the brain would light up in the research images that are created. So we don't only use 10% of our brain. We use different regions for different tasks, for different actions. Next brain fact is that brain size does not mean intelligence. So if you have a big brain, it doesn't mean that you're super intelligent automatically. There has been research undertaken which showed that it's only 0.3 or 0.4% correlation between brain size and intelligence. And I found an interesting fact, an interesting question linked to that. Did you know that Albert Einstein, supposedly be one of the most brainiest people ever lived, had a smaller brain than the average person, even though he was super intelligent? And I found that on Health Watch Kent. It's a very, very interesting fact. And that really shows how the amount of connections, neural pathways, says far more than if the brain is big or small. So it's important what's happening in the brain. Stimulation is important. Lots of stimulation and keeping the brain healthy, that can make a difference. I think I already mentioned earlier that the brain still keeps going when you sleep, when you rest. So that applies as well when you sleep, because the lymphatic system within the brain gets rid of waste products while we sleep. And that's one of the reasons why enough sleep and good sleep is very important for the brain as well. When you don't get enough sleep, the brain can't form or maintain all the pathways that it needs to form. It helps for the formation of memories, and it processes information from daytime as well, which may or may not sometimes lead to interesting dreams. Research suggests that both brain and body are actually very active when we sleep because of the metabolism and everything. And sleep helps to remove toxins from the brain which we accumulate during the day. And just like it was a myth that we don't use all of our brain, it was a myth that we are hardwired and that the brain doesn't change and stays the same. This is wrong and has been disproven with numerous research. The brain changes constantly. The development starts in the womb and goes on until we finally die. I will go in a separate episode into the topic of neuroplasticity, i.e. the fact that the brain constantly changes due to habits we discard, new habits we form, experiences and events and all sorts, what's going on in life and what's happening within our body as well. The brain changes constantly and never stays the same. So watch out for the neuroplasticity episode that is coming at a later date. Did you know that music has a huge effect on the brain? It's a great thing for mood regulation and for focus. Music affects the brain by activating different areas. I suppose different areas for different kinds of music, but it stimulates movement, it stimulates memories. It might bring up memories when you listen to certain songs. Different areas in the brain have different tasks when it comes to music. The temporal lobe processes tone and pitch. The cerebellum helps to process and regulate rhythm, timing, and physical movement. And then there's the amygdala and the hippocampus. They play a role in emotions and memories to do with the music we're listening to. Researchers claim classical and Baroque music are supposedly very good for concentration and focus. I'm not so sure about that, but maybe my skepticism is due to the fact that classical and Baroque music are not necessarily my most favorite types of music. So I stick to the music that I like and that I find most beneficial for focus or concentration, and that varies very much on my mood as well. So I wonder if other people have similar experiences. And our final un-jargoned brain fact in our collection here is that the brain does not feel pain. This might come as a surprise to you, as it came to me as a sufferer of headaches for many years. So this came as a total surprise that the brain doesn't feel pain. So this enables surgeons to perform open brain surgery without the patient feeling discomfort, and sometimes even when a patient is awake. So the brain itself has no pain receptors, no nociceptors as they're called. Those nociceptors are in layers of tissue that are between the brain and the skull, and they're called the dura and the either pia or pria. I don't know how exactly you pronounce that. It's spelled P-I-A. So in these layers of tissue, there are pain receptors. And what happens is that chemicals released from blood vessels near the dura and pia activate nociceptors, i.e. pain receptors, which then create and cause the headaches in us. Increased blood flow can also trigger migraines, which is why migraines are considered vascular headaches, and they create a hypersensitivity to light, sound, and touch as well. This brings us to the end of today's episode of the Un-jargoned Brain Facts. If you enjoyed listening to today's episode of Exploring Brain and Mind and all the Un-jargoned Brain Facts, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and all the other podcast outlets, and tune in again for the next episode.